Trans-Atlantic Airways Flight 447, cruising at 37,000 feet from London to New York, suddenly goes haywire. Cockpit screens flash red like a Christmas tree, alarms screaming loud enough to burst eardrums. Captain Michael Rodriguez, despite his 15 years of experience, panics. Autopilot systems have been completely compromised. Manual controls aren't responding. Co-pilot Jenny Walsh, Harvard Aeronautical Engineering graduate, hands trembling. All backup systems are down. We're hitting the ocean in 6 minutes. Flight attendant Emma, amid the screams of 400 passengers, desperately announces over the intercom, "Please remain calm." Meanwhile, in seat 23F, gray-haired, 67-year-old Sarah Mitchell slowly sets down her knitting. As she stands and walks toward the cockpit, a flight attendant calls out, "Ma'am, please remain seated." But Sarah remembers how she survived when electronic warfare systems crashed over Iraqi airspace 30 years ago in her F-16 Falcon. When she enters the cockpit, young technician Jackson screams in panic, "There's no solution. The AI system has complete control over us. No manual intervention is working." Sarah places her hand on the throttle, feeling that familiar metal coolness, and speaks in an ice-cold commander's voice. "Son, I flew F-16s over Baghdad in 1991 without any electronic support, purely on visual contact and hand feel through enemy fire. There was piloting before technology, and there still is." At that moment, everyone in the cockpit turns to Sarah, but no one knows that this quiet woman shot down 3 enemy MiGs single-handedly during Operation Desert Storm, a legendary pilot from classified operations that never made it into official records. Known in CIA files only by the codename Storm Angel, she completed all 47 dangerous missions successfully, but one day suddenly retired and chose an ordinary life. And now, to save 400 innocent lives, she have to use those deadly skills she learned in battlefields 30 years ago. Sarah Mitchell's extraordinary life began long before she ever touched the controls of a fighter jet. Born in 1954 in Colorado Springs, just outside the gates of the Air Force Academy, she grew up in the shadow of American military aviation. Her father, Colonel James Mitchell, was a decorated Vietnam veteran who flew 127 combat missions in an F-4 Phantom over the jungles of Southeast Asia. Her mother, Helen, was a former Army nurse who had served in field hospitals during some of the war's bloodiest battles. Sarah's childhood was filled with the sounds of jet engines thundering overhead and the stories of aerial combat her father would share during quiet evenings on their front porch. At age 8, she could identify every aircraft by sound alone. At 10, she was building model planes with precision that amazed even seasoned pilots who visited their home. But it was at 15, on that life-changing day in 1975, when her father took her up in a rented Cessna 172 for her first flying lesson. "Sarah," he said as they climbed through the Colorado sky, the Rocky Mountains spread below them like a rumpled blanket. The sky should never be closed to a woman. Not anymore. Not ever. That day, circling above Pikes Peak at 12,000 feet, she learned her first fundamental lesson. Technology will carry you, but your instincts will keep you alive. The moment her hands touched the controls, something magical happened. The Cessna responded to her touch as if it had been waiting for her all its life. Her father watched in amazement as his teenage daughter, who had never piloted an aircraft before, executed perfect turns, climbs, and descents with an intuitive understanding that veteran pilots spent years trying to develop. "You've got it, kid," he whispered, more to himself than to Sarah. "You've got the gift." When Sarah entered the Air Force Academy at 18 in 1977, she was one of only 157 women in a class of 1,500 cadets. The military was still grappling with the integration of women into its ranks. And the academy was a proving ground for whether women could handle the physical and mental demands of military aviation. The male cadets weren't just skeptical. Many were openly hostile. They questioned whether women had the physical strength to handle high-G maneuvers, the mental toughness to make split-second life-or-death decisions, or the emotional stability to function in combat situations. Sarah faced hazing, discrimination, and constant testing that went far beyond what her male counterparts endured. But Sarah's response was always the same: quiet excellence. In the simulator, she consistently scored in the top 5% of her class. During survival training in the Colorado wilderness, she outlasted cadets who outweighed her by 60 pounds. In academic studies, she maintained a 3.8 GPA while majoring in aeronautical engineering. Most importantly, during high-stress scenarios designed to break cadets mentally, Sarah displayed an unnatural calm that impressed even her harshest critics. Her tactical flight instructor, Major Tom Viper Bradley, a gruff Vietnam veteran with over 200 combat missions, initially doubted whether women belonged in fighter cockpits. But after watching Sarah handle a simulated emergency landing with engine failure and hydraulic loss, he pulled her aside. "Mitchell," he said, his weathered face serious, "I've been flying for 23 years. I've trained over 300 pilots. I've seen maybe a dozen who have what you have, that instinctive connection with the aircraft. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong up there." When Sarah graduated in 1981, she was ranked 23rd in her class of 1,500 and was selected for undergraduate pilot training at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona. But even then, her path to fighter aircraft wasn't guaranteed. Most female pilots were directed toward transport, tanker, or support aircraft. Fighter planes were still considered a male domain. Sarah's persistence and exceptional performance eventually earned her a slot in F-16 training at Luke Air Force Base. The F-16 Fighting Falcon was America's premier multi-role fighter, a technological marvel capable of Mach 2 speeds, 9G turns, and precision strikes against ground and air targets. More importantly, it was the first fly-by-wire fighter, meaning the aircraft was inherently unstable and required computer assistance to remain controllable. The training was brutal. Sarah learned to perform 9G turns that squeezed her body with 9 times the force of gravity, making her arms feel like they weighed 180 pounds each. She mastered air-to-air combat, learning to track and engage enemy aircraft while pulling maneuvers that would render most people unconscious. She practiced bombing runs, flying at 500 feet above the desert floor at 600 miles per hour, delivering ordnance with pinpoint accuracy. But it was the emergency procedures training that truly set Sarah apart. While other pilots relied heavily on electronic systems and computer assistance, Sarah practiced scenarios where all electronics failed. She learned to navigate by stars, to judge distance and speed by eye, to feel engine performance through the vibrations in her seat. "What happens when all your pretty computer screens go dark?" asked her instructor, Lieutenant Colonel Rick "Hammer" Thompson, during one particularly challenging training flight. "What happens when you're alone, behind enemy lines, with nothing but your eyes, your hands, and your brain?" Sarah's answer was simple. "Then you remember that the Wright brothers didn't have computers either." After completing F-16 training in 1987, Sarah was assigned to the 388th Tactical Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. For 3 years, she flew training missions, participated in red flag exercises, and honed her skills against some of the best pilots in the Air Force. She earned a reputation as Ice Queen, not because she was cold, but because she never seemed to lose her composure, no matter how intense the situation became. Then came 1990, and everything changed. On August 2, 1990, Iraqi forces under Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, threatening to destabilize the entire Middle East and control a significant portion of the world's oil supply. The United States began deploying forces to the region under Operation Desert Shield. Preparing for what would eventually become Operation Desert Storm. Sarah was among the first wave of pilots deployed to Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates. At 36 years old, she was finally going to test her skills in actual combat. The deployment was unlike anything she had experienced. The desert heat was oppressive, reaching 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. The living conditions were harsh. Pilots shared tents, ate MREs, and dealt with sandstorms that could ground aircraft for days. But most challenging was the knowledge that this wouldn't be a training exercise. The Iraqi military had the fourth largest army in the world, sophisticated air defense systems, and experienced pilots flying Soviet-built MiG fighters. Sarah was about to face an enemy that wanted to kill her. The night of January 17, 1991, changed Sarah's life forever. The air campaign of Operation Desert Storm began with precision strikes against Iraqi command and control centers, air defense sites, and military installations. Sarah was part of Package Q, a 12-aircraft formation tasked with destroying the Republican Guard communications center in Baghdad. The mission briefing was conducted in a dimly lit tent at 0300 hours. Intelligence officers explained that the target was heavily defended by SA-6 and SA-8 surface-to-air missile systems, as well as anti-aircraft artillery. Iraqi MiG-29s were known to patrol the area, and electronic warfare jamming was expected to be intense. Remember, said Colonel David Blackjack Morrison, the mission commander, the Iraqis have been preparing for this for months. They know. We're coming. Stay alert, stay alive, and get your bombs on target. Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Her F-16C was loaded with two 2,000-pound GBU-10 laser-guided bombs, designed to penetrate hardened targets. She had practiced this exact mission profile dozens of times, but this time, there wouldn't be a reset button if something went wrong. At 0445 hours, the formation took off into the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah was flying as Viper 7, positioned on the left wing of the formation. As they climbed through 25,000 feet, she could see the lights of Kuwait City in the distance, a city occupied by enemy forces for nearly 6 months. The formation entered Iraqi airspace at 0523 hours. Almost immediately, Sarah's threat warning system began screaming. Surface-to-air missiles were being fired at the formation. She could see explosions in the sky around them as SAMs detonated, trying to bring down the American fighters. But it was at 0534 hours, just 11 minutes after crossing into Iraq, that Sarah's world changed forever. Without warning, every electronic system in her F-16 went dark. The multi-function displays that showed her radar, navigation, weapon status, and engine parameters suddenly displayed nothing but static. Her heads-up display, which projected critical flight information onto her windscreen, went blank. Even her radio went silent. Sarah was flying at 32,000 feet, at 480 knots, over heavily defended enemy territory, and she was completely alone. The Iraqi electronic warfare systems had targeted her specific aircraft with concentrated jamming, while the other F-16S in the formation continued their mission. Sarah's Falcon had been effectively blinded and deafened. Most pilots would have immediately turned around and headed for home base. But Sarah wasn't most pilots. She remembered her father's words from that first flight lesson. Technology will carry you, but your instincts will keep you alive. She also remembered her instructor's question, what happens when all your pretty computer screens go dark? Now she knew. Sarah looked up through her canopy and saw the constellation Orion hanging in the pre-dawn sky. Using celestial navigation, techniques she had learned but never expected to use in combat, she determined her heading. She could feel the engine's power through the vibrations in her ejection seat. The sound of the wind over her canopy told her about her airspeed. The Pressure in her ears indicated her altitude. Most remarkably, she could still see the target. The Republican Guard Communications Center was a large concrete structure with distinctive architecture that she had studied in photographs for weeks. From 32,000 feet, using nothing but her eyes, she began planning her attack. Sarah put her F-16 into a steep dive, rolling inverted and pulling the nose toward the earth. Without her flight instruments, she had to judge her dive angle by feel and visual reference. Too steep, and she'd build up too much speed and overshoot the target. Too shallow, and she wouldn't have enough energy to escape after the attack. At 15,000 feet, she rolled wings level and began her attack run. The communications center grew larger in her windscreen. She could see Iraqi soldiers running for cover, muzzle flashes from anti-aircraft guns, and the smoke trails of surface-to-air missiles being fired at her. Without her computerized bombing system, Sarah had to rely on pure pilot skill. She estimated distance, calculated wind drift, and timed her weapon release based on years of training and natural instinct. At exactly the right moment, she pickled off both 2,000-pound bombs and immediately pulled into a hard left turn to escape the target area. As she climbed away from Baghdad, Sarah looked back to see two massive explosions engulf the communications center. Direct hits. Mission accomplished, but her ordeal wasn't over. As she headed southwest toward friendly territory, her threat warning system, miraculously functioning again, screamed a new warning. 3 Iraqi MiG-29s were climbing toward her from a base south of Baghdad. The MiG-29 was a formidable opponent, faster than the F-16 in a straight line, with powerful radar and long-range missiles. Under normal circumstances, Sarah's F-16 would have significant advantages in a dogfight: better maneuverability, superior pilot training, and advanced avionics. But with her electronics still mostly inoperative, she was at a severe disadvantage. The first MiG fired an R-27 missile from 20 miles away. Sarah saw the white smoke trail streaking toward her and immediately began defensive maneuvers. Without her electronic countermeasures, she had to defeat the missile through pure flying skill, rapid changes in direction and altitude that would confuse the missile's guidance system. The missile missed by less than 100 feet. The second MiG was closer. Now, only 10 miles away and closing fast. Sarah could see the aircraft as a small speck against the desert floor. She had one advantage. The Iraqi pilot probably assumed she was using her radar to track him. He didn't know she was flying by visual contact alone. Sarah used this to her advantage. Instead of turning toward the MiG as her radar would normally dictate, she used an unexpected maneuver, diving toward the desert floor and then pulling up in a vertical climb that brought her behind the Iraqi fighter. With her gun selected and only her eyes to aim, Sarah opened fire. The M61 Vulcan cannon spat 20mm rounds at 6,000 rounds per minute. She walked the tracers across the MiGs fuselage and watched as the enemy aircraft exploded in a fireball. The third MiG, seeing his wingman destroyed, decided discretion was the better part of valor and turned away from the fight. Sarah made it back to Al Dafra Air Base, flying on fumes. Her F-16 had barely enough fuel for landing, and her electronic systems were still largely inoperative. But she was alive, her mission was successful, and she had just proven something that would echo through military aviation history: that the human pilot, not the computer, was still the most important component of any fighter aircraft. That night, Sarah earned the call sign Storm Angel. The other pilots said she had appeared out of nowhere over Baghdad like an avenging angel, struck with surgical precision, and disappeared back into the storm of battle. For the next 10 years, Sarah flew missions that officially never happened. CIA operations in Bosnia, covert strikes in Iraq during the no-fly zone enforcement, reconnaissance flights over North Korea that pushed the boundaries of international airspace. Every mission required the same skills she had used that night over Baghdad: the ability to fly and fight when technology failed. Sarah's 47th and final mission came in 2001 over Afghanistan. Flying a specially modified F-16 with stealth characteristics, she was tasked with eliminating a high-value target in a cave complex near the Pakistani border. The mission required flying at extremely low altitude through mountainous terrain, at night, in weather conditions that grounded every other aircraft in the theater. The mission was successful, but Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone. Who knew her? At age 47, at the peak of her career, with opportunities for promotion to general officer rank, she submitted her retirement papers. The official reason was personal considerations. The real reason was simpler. Sarah had spent 20 years proving that she belonged in the cockpit of a fighter plane. She had nothing left to prove to anyone, including herself. Sarah returned to civilian life, settling in a small house in New Hampshire, not far from where she had grown up. She lived quietly, tending a small garden, volunteering at the local library, and knitting scarves for charity. The neighbors knew her as a friendly older woman who kept to herself. None of them knew that the quiet lady next door was one of the most decorated combat pilots in American history, which brings us back to Trans-Atlantic Airways Flight 447. 16 years later, Sarah had been visiting her granddaughter Emma in London, a 12-year-old girl who was fascinated by her grandmother's stories of flying, though she never knew how much of them were true. The flight home was supposed to be routine, a peaceful end to a wonderful week with family. But at 37,000 feet over the North Atlantic, routine ended abruptly. When Sarah entered the cockpit, she quickly assessed the situation with the trained eye of someone who had spent 3 decades evaluating life-threatening emergencies. The Boeing 787's electronic systems had been compromised by what appeared to be a sophisticated cyber attack. The artificial intelligence that normally managed flight controls, navigation, and safety systems had been turned against the aircraft itself. Captain Rodriguez and co-pilot Walsh were both excellent pilots by civilian standards, but they had grown up in an era where computers handled most of the complex calculations and system management. They had never flown an aircraft without electronic assistance, and they had no reference point for what Sarah was about to teach them. "Captain Rodriguez," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in life or death. "Situations. I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm Sarah Mitchell, retired Air Force pilot. Call sign Storm Angel. I've been in situations like this before, and I can help you bring this aircraft home safely." Rodriguez looked at her with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a commercial aircraft with 400 souls on board. The systems are completely compromised. We need professional help. Captain, I am professional help. I have over 5,000 hours in high-performance aircraft, including 1,200 hours of combat time. I've successfully completed 47 missions under conditions where electronic failure was the least of my problems." Co-pilot Walsh, her Harvard engineering degree suddenly seeming inadequate, asked hesitantly, "Storm Angel? I've heard that call sign before, in aviation history classes." Sarah nodded grimly, "Probably. But right now, what matters isn't my past, it's our future. And we have about 4 minutes to figure out how to land this aircraft safely." Technician Jackson, still in panic mode, protested, "But ma'am, this isn't a fighter jet. It's a civilian aircraft with fly-by-wire controls. Without the computers, it's unflyable." Sarah walked over to the control panel, her experienced eyes quickly identifying the key systems. "Jackson, every aircraft, from the Wright Flyer to this Boeing 787, is governed by the same fundamental principles of aerodynamics: lift, thrust, weight, and drag. The computers make it easier, but they don't make it possible. The possibility was always there, She pointed to various controls and displays. This aircraft has manual reversion capability. It's built into the design as a safety feature. We just need to activate it and remember how to fly the way pilots did for the first 70 years of aviation. Sarah's hands moved over the controls with practiced efficiency. Jackson, I need you to locate the manual flight control disconnect. It should be near the center pedestal. Found it, but the manual says never to use it except in ground testing. The manual was written by people who never had to land a hijacked aircraft with 400 lives at stake. Pull it. Jackson hesitated, then followed Sarah's instruction. Immediately, the feel of the controls changed. The artificial stability that the computers provided was gone, and the aircraft became less predictable, more challenging to fly. But to Sarah, it felt like coming home. Now, she said to Rodriguez, put your hands on the controls. Feel that vibration through the yoke? That's the aircraft talking to you. It's telling you about airspeed, about angle of attack, about the wind conditions outside. Rodriguez gripped the controls, his knuckles white with tension. I can feel it, but I don't know what it means. It means you're connected to the aircraft in a way that no computer can replicate. That vibration is information, more reliable than any electronic display because it can't be hacked, it can't be jammed, and it can't lie. Over the next 20 minutes, Sarah conducted the most intensive flying lesson of her career. She taught Rodriguez and Walsh how to interpret engine sounds, how to judge airspeed by the feel of control pressures, how to maintain altitude by watching the horizon instead of electronic displays. The most important thing, she explained as they began their approach to JFK Airport, is to trust your instincts. The aircraft wants to fly. It was designed to fly. Our job isn't to force it, it's to guide it. The landing approach was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. Without electronic guidance systems, Sarah had to judge the approach angle visually, calculating distance and altitude using landmarks and experience gained over thousands of hours of flying. Airspeed is good, she called out, watching the way. The aircraft responded to control inputs. Sink rate is a little high, easy back pressure on the yoke, that's it. Feel how the aircraft responds? It's telling you exactly what it needs. The passengers, unaware of the drama playing out in the cockpit, felt the aircraft descend toward JFK Airport. Through the windows they could see emergency vehicles lining the runway, fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue equipment standing by for what could have been a catastrophic crash. But Sarah Mitchell, call sign Storm Angel, had no intention of crashing. The Boeing 787 touched down on runway 22L with a gentle kiss that would have been impressive even under normal circumstances. The aircraft rolled to a stop, engines spooling down, and 400 passengers erupted in applause without knowing exactly why they were applauding. In the cockpit, Rodriguez and Walsh sat in stunned silence. How? Rodriguez finally asked. How did you know exactly what to do? Sarah smiled, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. Experience, Captain. And the knowledge that underneath all the computers and electronics, an aircraft is still just a machine that wants to fly. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. As the passengers deplaned, many stopping to shake Sarah's hand without knowing exactly what she had done, Sarah quietly collected her knitting and prepared to return to her anonymous life in New Hampshire. Captain Rodriguez stopped her at the gate. Mrs. Mitchell, Storm Angel, I need to know. Why did you retire? Why did someone with your skills choose to disappear? Sarah looked out the terminal window at the aircraft she had just saved, then back at the young captain. Because, Captain Rodriguez, sometimes the greatest service you can provide is knowing when to step aside and let the next generation take over. But that doesn't mean you stop being ready when your country or 400 strangers need you. That night, the story made international headlines. Mysterious passenger saves aircraft in dramatic emergency landing. But the media never learned. Sarah's true identity. She had returned to New Hampshire, to her quiet house and her simple life, carrying the satisfaction of knowing that Storm Angel had flown one more mission. In the end, Sarah Mitchell's story proves a simple truth. Technology may change, but the fundamentals of courage, skill, and service remain constant. Sometimes the person sitting quietly in seat 23F, knitting scarves for charity, is exactly the hero you need when the impossible becomes necessary. The sky never forgets its daughters, and sometimes when called upon, they remember how to answer.